in. Okay. All right. Thanks, Hannah. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today at our Facts and Snacks webinar for February. If you're hopping on, I encourage you to mute yourselves for now. And later on, if you want to unmute to ask a question, you absolutely can. If you wouldn't mind trying to do that yourselves, otherwise I can always do that on my end too. We're going to wait just another minute to see if they're letting in some other folks. Thank you all for being here. This might be a smaller group today, but just know that we're going to have some great information and lots of time for questions as well. If you all would like to introduce yourselves in the chat, you're with your name, pronouns if you're comfortable sharing, and then also your organization and or role at your organization, that would be wonderful. So we are recording this webinar today, and I'm going to admit a couple more folks and then get us started. Okay.
Hi.
Hello, welcome. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself while we're going to get started as folks are hopping on, and there'll be some options later for you all to ask some questions. I'm just going to put some instructions in the chat and we'll get going. All right, one more piece. My apologies for my multitasking. We'll get better. All right, if you all wouldn't mind going ahead and introducing yourselves in the chat. If you would like to do that with your name, your pronouns, and your organization, that would be great. So we have, for February, here are Facts and Snacks. We have a wonderful presenter, and I just want to go over a couple tech things really quick. So I'm Brandy from Violence Free Colorado. If you have any tech problems, please let me know in the chat. If you would like to access the Spanish language channel, you can click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select the Spanish icon or select Spanish language. That channel is active currently. If you're having any problems with that, please let me know. If you would like the ability to pin the ASL interpreter for live ASL interpretation, also message me in the chat. You can do that privately or to the group, whatever your comfort level is. But let me know and I'll make sure that you can go ahead and pin the ASL interpreter if you want to see her in a larger view. We do have this webinar being recorded. It also says up in the upper left-hand corner where it says live Zoom with Rev.com. Just want to let you all know that that means that we are not live streaming, that Rev.com just supports our captioning. So if you would like to turn on captions, you can click on the either the CC at the bottom or on the More button and select to show the captions. That might just depend upon your version of Zoom what that looks like. Again, if you have any questions about any tech stuff, let me know. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Amanda Carlson from Cobalt, and she's the director of the Abortion Fund, and she's going to lead us through some great information for today. Thanks so much, Amanda, and welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's so nice to be here. Yeah, as Brandy said, I'm Amanda Carlson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of the Cobalt Abortion Fund. I've been with Cobalt for about 5.5 years. Doesn't feel like it, but I guess if you work in abortion rights, time is relative. So I started as an organizer, so doing work in the community, educating folks about the importance of abortion access, the importance of health equity. My background is in social work and public policy, so super excited to be here today. I'll tell you a little bit about Cobalt, the organization, and then I'll sort of dive into my area of work, which is our abortion fund. So Cobalt has actually been an advocacy organization for abortion rights and reproductive health care access for a long time. We've worn a lot of different hats. We were formerly an affiliate of NRL Pro-Choice America, and the organization existed under some different names, but the organization itself has existed in Colorado since 1967. Fun fact, Colorado was the first state to decriminalize abortion in 1967, so before Roe v. Wade. So the organization has been around. For quite some time. We work on the grassroots level to educate folks about the importance of abortion access and bodily autonomy as a social justice issue. We also work at the state capitol and are involved in elections to make sure that we're...
Sorry,
I'm just going to mute this person. So we work at the state level and also with some federal election work to make sure that we're electing pro-choice, pro-abortion rights champions to our lovely Capitol building, as well as on the federal level as well. We were one of the groups involved in passing the Reproductive Health Equity Act this last session, which enshrines the right to access abortion care at the state level. So very exciting, especially in light of all of the challenges that accessing abortion and our movement has really faced in the last couple of years. So with that, I will say I'm fun at parties if you want to talk to me about abortion. I'll try not to be too much of a downer. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Okay. Yeah, the Cobalt Abortion Fund. The Cobalt Abortion Fund is a 100% donor funded entity of Cobalt, which is our larger 501c3 foundation. A cool thing about the abortion fund, we acquired it actually back in 2017. So I was working as an organizer, but having a social work background, it sort of made sense to shift over into this work. The abortion fund itself is not only 100% donor funded, but it's a separate pool of funding. So any dollar donated to the abortion fund goes directly back to supporting those who are seeking abortion care but are unable to afford the cost. The abortion fund itself has also been around in the state for quite some time. It started in 1984 out of the Unitarian Church here in Denver. It was basically a response to Colorado voting to pass our version of the Hyde Amendment, which is federal legislation. The Hyde Amendment and our also state ban on public funding blocks anybody receiving Medicaid dollars, any state employees from using insurance to cover the cost of abortion care. So no public dollars, no public fund dollars can go towards this care, which, as many of you may know, disproportionately affects low-income communities and those who are already struggling to afford healthcare and might not live in an area that has close access to this form of healthcare. So we're a small team. We're sort of a department on the larger scale of Cobalt, but we are a staff of 3 folks. There's myself, our staffer Melissa, who is our liaison, basically in charge of connecting us to new clinic partners, working with all of our providers across the state to make sure that we're in good communication with them, that we're supporting the care that they're providing, and that they know how to contact us with any questions to make sure that any of that burden for abortion seekers is alleviated. And then we have our wonderful intake coordinator, Karina. Karina is bilingual, so she's able to support those who are Spanish speaking and seeking this care. And she basically does all of our case management for everyone who comes to us, not only needing procedure funding, but also in light of the fall of Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs Supreme Court decision last June, we did decide as an organization to cover practical support, which is just sort of abortion rights lingo for travel support. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but Karina organizes both sides of that support as well. So we have a great team. So yeah, brass tacks, we pay for abortions. a lot of folks cannot afford this service. If you are lucky enough to have insurance that covers the cost of abortion care, that is fantastic. But some insurance providers do not cover this care. If you're seeking care at a religiously affiliated institution, it might not be not only offered, but even referred. So there are a multitude of barriers that I can get into on how this care can be difficult to access, but a huge barrier for a lot of folks is cost. If your insurance does not cover this cost, if you're coming from Texas and there's a lot of safety concerns in being, public in any way to try to receive support for this type of care, it can be really difficult. We always say in this movement that Roe was the floor and not the ceiling. While it was devastating to have that federal right to abortion care lost at that level and that protection lost, abortion being legal does not really matter if it's not accessible, and cost can be a huge barrier in that. So we've existed in different capacities, now a part of Cobalt, to offset that cost. And something we're really proud of in the abortion fund for the Cobalt Abortion Fund is that we don't have an income requirement and we don't have a state residency requirement. So even before sort of the national healthcare crisis that we're seeing in light of Dobbs, and for those of you that don't know, Dobbs is the Supreme Court case that ended up overturning Roe v. Wade last June. We're able to help people even long before that who are coming here from out of state to seek abortion care, because many states did have a multitude of different barriers, whether that's 72-hour waiting periods, parental consent, a lot of different piecemeal laws that exist in states that are hostile to abortion access. A lot of these states made it very difficult to access this care. So people were coming to Colorado even before we saw this flurry of trigger laws and abortion bans happen in light of the Supreme Court decision last June. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. So basically how we operate with not having that income requirement, which as many of you probably know, if somebody falls just beyond that threshold to receive sort of that federal poverty equation on what determines low income versus not at a lot of state and federal institutions that provide support. A lot of folks who fall just above that with an income requirement are still struggling financially, but then they would not qualify for some of these poverty level equation level assistance. So we are essentially in a position where we might not be able to fund the entirety of someone's procedure, but we are able to offset that cost as much as we can, and we have no restrictions for somebody to be disqualified. So we can essentially take anyone at their word that says that they need assistance and help them not only fund their abortion care itself, but we have also moved into the field of being essentially healthcare travel agents and helping people navigate their way here as well. So we partner with clinics across Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah, and also several newly formed telemedicine organizations. I believe 2021 was when the FDA lifted its restriction on mifepristone, which is one of the medications used in medication abortion. Some of you may be aware of this. There is currently a case in the Fifth Circuit in Texas with a very conservative judge that could potentially restrict this FDA approval of mifepristone, which would be really devastating, even in states like Colorado, where we are not only very friendly to abortion care and access, but we have it enshrined in our state statute now. If you live in a rural town in the mountains of Colorado and it's a snowstorm, it doesn't really matter if you have that legal right if you don't have a working car that can safely get you to a clinic. So telehealth organizations are fantastic for that type of access. We support folks at any gestation and any sort of situation that need help. So we navigate people to clinics in New Mexico and of course clinics across our lovely state of Colorado as well. As I said, we don't have any restrictions on someone receiving our funding. And the way that we often work with clinics is we have a block grant system. So the clinics can actually distribute our funding on our behalf. So if somebody walks through the door of an abortion clinic and they don't have any funding and they've never heard of Cobalt, the clinic staff can actually distribute our funding for us. And so what we really want to avoid, especially when people are facing insurmountable barriers to get here, if they're coming from states like Texas or Oklahoma, we don't want them to have to reschedule. On the travel support side, it's often very difficult for people to travel for care. You shouldn't have to travel for healthcare, but that is the state of our country right now. If you have an hourly job, you're not only dealing with trying to get that time off from work, but you're dealing with losing those wages. And many of the clients that we work with live paycheck to paycheck. Many struggle to find childcare. We do reimburse for childcare, but that is also dependent on someone's childcare provider being available to take on their children when they travel here for care. Many of the folks we work with are already parents and cite financial difficulty as one of their main reasons for seeking this care. Kind of just shift this over here so I can read my own slide. So yeah, in light of this threat, we did decide, knowing how the Supreme Court was likely going to decide on this case that would overturn Roe v. Wade, we did decide to cover travel as well. And, I will say, I still remember that day the decision came down. It was one that we knew was coming, but I don't think any of us in this work could have really been prepared for it. Our caseload tripled. Clients that were contacting us were letting us know that they had appointments in states that had trigger bans. And if you don't know what a trigger ban is, it's a sort of like a sleeper form of legislation that existed on many states' books that Roe had blocked from being enacted. So as soon as Roe was overturned at the federal level, those trigger bans were able to be enacted. And a lot of anti-abortion politicians moved quickly to make that happen. So folks in waiting rooms in some of these states were being turned away, or they were getting a call from, if they had an appointment that afternoon, being told that their appointment no longer existed. And so it was devastating for us to see this right to bodily autonomy lost, but also taking on sort of the secondary trauma of a lot of the folks who were scrambling to get a new appointment, now having to travel to get to that appointment. And I think a lot of us in the abortion rights space weren't really able to process our own feelings because we were just frantically trying to get folks the help that they needed. Many of you who work with survivors of domestic violence are probably very aware of some of these instances of supporting clients while also, taking on some of that trauma as well. And right now, the volume has stayed really consistent. We get anywhere from 10 to 30 requests per day for assistance. In my first days running the fund back in 2017, it was a lot smaller. It was about 5 to 10 on a busy day. So we're really seeing that impact of this national healthcare crisis that we're in. And 2/3 of our clients come from Texas, as well as many other highly restricted states all over the country. We have supported folks even coming from outside the US who are seeking care. Folks often come to Colorado to seek later abortion care, Colorado and New Mexico as well. This is a very limited, there's very limited availability of later abortion care. There's not a lot of providers in the country that are able to provide this service, that are trained in it. A lot of medical schools offer abortion care training in general as an elective. So there's just a huge shortage of knowledge within that field on how to provide this sort of care. And the folks who need that sort of care are often in really difficult situations. They are often survivors of abuse. So they're often minors, or in a lot of the instances of those seeking later abortion care, it's desired pregnancies that are not viable. So these cases are something we aren't strangers to even before Roe v. Wade fell, but we still are supporting folks, who need to get that type of care as well. So it's a lot of navigating in sort of different directions while making sure we're doing proper intake assessment and supporting folks in all of the ways that they need.
Amanda, this is Brandy. I just wanted to say this is awesome information. If you wouldn't mind maybe slowing down your speech just a little bit.
Sure, no problem.
Just want to make sure that the interpreters catch it all.
Yes,
Thank you
good
so
flag.
much.
Thank you. Apologies to the interpreters. I do tend to talk fast sometimes. So it's pretty easy to get a hold of us. We do our best through our communications team and our partners in the field and other agencies across the state to make sure that we're available resource, and folks know how to find us. We have an intake form online that clients can fill out. We gather basic information on what sort of procedure they're seeking, where they're coming from, if they need travel support, and then often our intake staff in communicating with clients can identify other areas where support might be needed, whether that's childcare assistance. That we do often face or support clients who are surviving a violent partner. And so if we're able to identify that, then that's why we are so appreciative of our partnerships with organizations like Violence Free Colorado, so we can make sure we're equipping those that we're working with all of the resources they need, even if they don't live in the state. I did touch on this. We do have some other areas of work that our abortion fund is involved in. Because we are sort of the direct service arm of Cobalt, we are often working in very close quarters with the policy team. Any good policy is informed by those that it impacts. And so we are often working closely with our political team to make sure that the voices and the barriers that our clients face are front and center of how we shape policy at the state level. We often testify at the Capitol to make sure that people are aware of the barriers that abortion seekers often face, especially in this current landscape. We do outreach to clinics to make sure our providers are supported, that they know how to get in touch with us because they are a lot more patient facing than we might be. And also to get the provider input on how we craft policy is really important as well. We do our best to navigate people based on their situation. Because of the sort of domino effect caused by our federal right to abortion access being overturned, a lot of Colorado was getting flooded with calls for support to our abortion fund and also to providers for appointments. And it really pushed appointment wait times out into that 2 or 3 week mark at the end of June when this case came down. And that volume hasn't really changed either. And so we work with our providers to make sure we know who has the soonest availability. Often it's sort of a catch-22 that clients are facing, where this is a very time-sensitive issue as folks are being forced to travel and make plans and wait for an appointment. Often it pushes them potentially into later gestations, which can be more complex medical procedures and more costly. So we want to try to make sure we can get folks the care they need as quickly as they're able to get here and receive it. And it's important to support our providers as well. If one clinic has a 2 to 3 week wait time, but we know another clinic can take folks this week, we do our best to sort of navigate clients where they need to go. We have a medical advisory committee that is statewide, so we can communicate with abortion providers, advocates, clinic staff, even medical students across our state, and make sure that they are aware of our work and we can support them, especially those who are training to be abortion providers. And we do a lot of agency referrals. As I mentioned, many of the clients we work with are traveling from out of state. They might need childcare resources. They might be living with a violent partner. They might be experiencing homelessness. So we do our best to make sure that we're gathering all the information so we can support people as holistically as possible. So I'll pause here for questions. I definitely, again, apologies to the interpreter if I moved through that too quickly, but would love to I'll stop sharing here and would, love to open it up to any questions, or if folks want to have sort of more of a dialogue on how our work intersects with the mission of Violence Free Colorado, I would love to do that as well.
Thank you so much, Amanda. This is Brandy. I really appreciate you sharing so much information. So for folks who are on the call, if you have questions for Amanda, maybe you have a scenario that you're not sure about, are there questions that you have about how to talk to survivors about the program, about accessing funds? What questions do you all have? We want to make sure that we use this time and space to answer those things, because I know you all have some questions. What things are coming up for everyone? All right, in the chat, we have Nancy who says, where are services available in Southwest Colorado, which would be Durango and Pagosa Springs area?
Yeah, so Durango has a Planned Parenthood that provides abortion up to 11 weeks, I believe. So there are in-clinic options in Southwest Colorado. Obviously not as many in rural parts of the state as, the Denver metro area. And with several of these telehealth organizations that we partner with, folks can have medication abortion mailed to their either their home, or if they're traveling from out of state, many of them will send to a post office, and the person can just pick it up there. And we support people who travel for that as well. I will say, it's that is some access, but it's not ideal. There's definitely a need for more abortion providers across our state and region, especially with folks coming to a lot of our more southern located clinics from states like Texas. About 2/3 of the clients we help travel do come from specifically Texas, mostly just because, they have a lot of restrictions. Abortion is inaccessible there, but also Texas is just a huge state, and 1 in 10 people who can become pregnant do live in Texas. So those restrictions have had sort of a national domino effect for sure. How many weeks can medication abortion can be used up to? It depends on the provider. So these telehealth organizations do have trained abortion providers on staff, and they do a telehealth appointment with somebody to make sure that they are a right candidate for that sort of service. But it's typically, rule of thumb is 11 to 12 weeks is what most telehealth providers can send medication to you for.
These are great questions. Keep them coming. If you would like to unmute yourselves to ask a question, if for some reason you cannot unmute yourself, I can do that for you, or you can type them in the chat. Again, any questions, scenarios, advice around, again, wording, language, how to share things, anything that you're noticing in your work, working with survivors. We'll just pause for a second and see for questions.
And I'll add to, on the point of where services are available, if someone reaches out to us and they are, stressed out, they don't know where to start, we will help them identify where they're located. I will say we implement HIPAA protections of privacy, as well as a lot of tech security to make sure that the folks we're working with are protected, especially if they're coming from a state like Texas that has sort of vigilante policies around going after this population. We do work with folks to identify what their needs are and make sure we're routing them to a clinic that makes sense for them, even if they have never heard of these abortion providers, don't know where to start, things like that.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, Amanda, about the tech piece, because that is something that I know in general with for DV advocates, especially, technology is a layer of safety planning, but when we're talking about abortion and healthcare in general, really making sure folks are including tech in that discussion is so important. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do try to implement some best practices. We have a quickly exit our site button on every page of our Abortion Fund website if somebody needs to quickly exit. We always ask clients what's the best way to contact them, and if they provide a phone number or email, asking if it's safe to contact them at any point, or if we should shift to, scheduling something, just to make sure that folks are never put in a difficult position or even a dangerous one, because they're trying to access our resources. And I'll drop the link to our website in the chat as well. So as you are working with your clients and the populations that you all work with, I will definitely provide my personal contact information, but if you do come across clients that, I apologize for my dog, if you do come across clients who need our resources, you can either contact us directly. We definitely work with advocates on behalf of clients, or if somebody would prefer, here's how they can get a hold of us directly as well.
And it looks like there's another question in the chat from Kelly. It says, do you help educate folks on how to stay safe when returning to a vigilante state like Texas?
That's a great question. And, I will say we can't give legal advice, but we do, based on the advisement of the attorneys that we do work with, whether it's the counsel for Cobalt or we have several attorneys on our staff and board. We do remind folks, it is abortion care is a right, and it is legal in Colorado. We have a governor, an attorney general, and a state legislature that will not cooperate with a hostile state trying to extradite somebody. And I will also note that it is a constitutional right to travel across state lines. So we, to the best of our ability, do try to relieve some of those fears, but especially the vigilante law in Texas, SB 8, is designed to invoke fear. That is its entire point. It is that's why it was not able to be blocked by the lower courts, because it's not enforced by the state, it's enforced by individuals. So it is meant to make folks afraid. And so we do deal with that fear a lot, and we just do our best to reassure people that it is their right to come here, and we will do everything we can to protect their privacy and make sure that they can, safely and quickly get the care that they need. I will also say that Cobalt and some of our partner organizations in the reproductive health rights and justice space are working on a bill this session. It's called Protecting Patients and Providers. And so it will be an additional layer of protection at the state level to make sure that abortion providers in our state providing much needed care and those seeking it, no matter where they live, are protected for getting this care here in Colorado.
What other questions do people have? Are there scenarios that you've heard of or things that you're not sure maybe if they're true or not? That can also be something that can be helpful to talk through, because sometimes there's a lot of misinformation out there, right? Like, you want to make sure that we're sharing the most up-to-date information with survivors who are asking questions and needing resources. Thank you for putting your information, Amanda.
Of course, yeah. You brought up a really good point about misinformation, and I will note that another area of work that Cobalt has been involved in for quite some time is combating what we call fake clinics or anti-abortion counseling centers. Often they identify as crisis pregnancy centers, so you might be familiar with that language. But basically, many of them are religiously affiliated in funding. Many of them actually receive state dollars in different states. And their entire mission is to dissuade anybody seeking abortion care from doing so. So often they target lower income communities by providing free pregnancy and STD tests. Many of them will set up next to an actual abortion provider and use similar branding or names to confuse folks. And it's quite nefarious, the mission of a lot of these places. Many of them will either say that you're farther along than you are, so it's too late for you to get an abortion if that's what you want. Some of them will say that you have plenty of time and you're not that far along, and then somebody finds out that they're, maybe 15, 16 weeks pregnant and they did not know that was the case. So their whole point really is to, there's a lot of promise of providing diapers and formula and other resources for someone to parent, but many of those resources do end after a couple of months from a lot of these centers. And even if you do want to carry a pregnancy to term and decide to parent, you should be seeing a real healthcare provider. And most of these places do not employ actual doctors. So we are constantly working to make sure that we're educating folks around the dangers of these centers and making sure that they're talking to actual medical professionals, no matter what their pregnancy outcome is. And Yeah, I mean, I think especially the targeting of lower income communities is something that we see quite frequently. We actually had somebody who made an appointment with what they thought was an abortion provider in Colorado, and it was one of these crisis pregnancy centers, and they were traveling from Texas, and this center let them travel all the way here. And fortunately, they reached out to one of our partners, the Colorado Doula Project, which is a doula focused abortion fund. And they were able to intercept this person and let them know what the center actually was and was not going to provide them as far as the healthcare they wanted, and then rerouted them to an actual abortion provider because that is the care that they actually wanted. So quite nefarious and frustrating. And it's definitely something we try to educate the community around. So I'm happy to be a resource if you ever come across clients of your own that have interacted with one of these centers. You know, we can definitely make sure that we're getting them connected to a real healthcare provider.
We have another question in the chat that says, what is the max number of weeks into pregnancy that an elective, not meeting an exemption, abortion procedure can legally be performed?
Colorado does not have any gestational limits on abortion care. That was one of the tenets, the core tenets of the Reproductive Health Equity Act that we passed last year. Often gestational limits are not based in any medical science, and they are not supported by the medical community. Most hostile to abortion states that do pass these gestational limits, they are very arbitrary, and they prevent medical providers from providing the care that folks need and that is informed by medical science. So we believe that the decision to end a pregnancy should be between a person and their doctor without the state getting involved with arbitrary, not backed up by any actual research gestational limits. Abortion at any stage is safe when it's provided by an actual abortion provider and not, someone masquerading as an abortion provider like some of these crisis pregnancy centers do. And if I didn't answer that question, feel free to chime in.
All right, looks like we got some positive feedback from Nancy that she appreciated that answer. And again, as we have another question. Is there any good news on the horizon at the federal level? That is a great question, Kelly.
Oh, Kelly, this is why I'm not fun at parties. I will say, given the current makeup of Congress, we are not very hopeful. That is why we are, in Colorado working quite diligently to make sure we can protect the right to abortion care, as well as resources for those who do choose to parent at the state level, because we don't feel that we can really see a positive outcome coming out of this Congress. We know that the White House, the executive branch, President Biden is supportive of the right to access abortion and did issue an executive order in light of the Dobbs decision that ended Roe v. Wade. But, I will also say it is very important for federally elected officials to constantly be held accountable. And we are often involved in federal elections for that very purpose. We do work closely with, Representative DeGette, who is the co-chair of the pro-choice caucus, represents District 1, which is Denver. So we do have allies in the House and Senate on the federal level, but we have seen pieces of legislation such as the Women's Health Protection Act pass through the House in the last Congress, but it obviously did not go anywhere in the Senate. So always hopeful, but maybe cautiously optimistic, because right now we don't see a tangible route. I will also add that at the state level, which is something that we do feel more positive about, we are working on a ballot measure for 2024 to overturn this Colorado funding ban on abortion care.
It's great to know that there's at least something on the horizon that seems a little more positive, at least here in Colorado. And the work is ongoing. And
Yes.
and thank you so much, Amanda, for being able to be here as a resource. While folks are thinking if they have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll real quick. And this is an anonymous poll. It is in English and in Spanish. So feel free to go ahead and take a few seconds to fill that out. There's 3 different questions. And I'll just leave that up for maybe about 30 seconds or so. And in the chat, we have another question. It's from Lori. It says, what do you need from us? How can we help? Great question, Lori.
That is a great question, Lori. I mean, one, the work that all of you are doing is so important, and I think it intersects so much with what we do. You know, there's a lot of layers of individual freedom and bodily autonomy and the dignity that a lot of you advocate for survivors of violence. I think, you know, I would love to connect with any of you and make sure, you know, identify more ways we can support one another's work. You know, knowing that the Abortion Fund is a resource, I think will always be helpful, especially if you come across a client that might need our services. But, you know, I also would love to know what all of you are doing and how we at Cobalt can support your work as well. We do have organizers across the state, so always happy to do a joint event, whether it's educational, fundraising, because you all do such important work supporting survivors as well.
Wonderful. Okay, I just wanted to share out that we did stop the poll, and thank you all for responding. Really appreciate your responses. And I see in the chat from Laura, thank you. I had no idea about your organization. Another reason to be a proud Coloradan. And then also question from Nancy, have you connected with public policy committees for both BFC and CCASA?
That's a great question. I know we have worked, I believe our organizing director is the one who connected me to BFC, and I know our political director has worked with CCASA folks at different times, but definitely if any of you are involved with those groups, I'm happy to connect you with our policy team as well.
Wonderful. And I'll say for Violence Free Colorado, we do a monthly executive directors often attend these monthly statewide meetings. And so they're focused more for folks in leadership. And in January, we did have someone from Cobalt come visit with us and kind of talk about how things are going in terms of legislature and kind of the status of things. So we're definitely looking forward to keeping the partnership moving forward. And we want to keep making sure we know how Cobalt is focusing their attention and how we can be supportive of all of the things that they're doing. So the relationship is alive and well, and we're doing whatever we can. Other questions? Are there other things, since we have Amanda here, that anyone wants to ask? And I will let you all know that we will go ahead and for the follow-up email for folks who registered, and I'll make sure that Amanda's information as well as the Cobalt website will be in that follow-up information, as well as the slides that she shared with us today. I'm also going to put in the chat I know I gave you all the poll, but in case anyone wants to share any narrative feedback, if you would like to share anonymous or non-anonymous narrative feedback, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat, and we'll send this out in the follow-up email as well. But just in case, if you don't feel like you want to, mention anything now, you have that opportunity to utilize the anonymous poll or anonymous feedback form if you would like to. And I'm not seeing any more feedback in the chat. I would like to say thank you so much, Amanda, for being here, for answering so many questions and sharing such really useful information and being such a wonderful resource. I'd also like to say thank you to our interpreters, both Bea and Christine. Thank you for your hard work. And looks like we might just go ahead and end a little bit early today. And just a reminder, Amanda shared her contact information. So if you would like to contact her. That's fine. If you have a question that you think is more geared towards us here at Violence Free, feel free to ask us. You can always connect with us. So, looks like in the chat, Kelly shared, thank you, Amanda, for doing this amazing work. Yes, absolutely. I want to echo that. And thank you all for participating and attending today. Be on the lookout for our March and April Facts and Snacks webinar details. We're actually it's going to be kind of a two-parter. So it'll be the same group of folks, and we're going to focus on doing some really in-depth focusing on the national LGBTQ organization that's doing some new TA. They're based in Los Angeles, but they are a nationwide organization, and we're going to be able to do a little bit more than 101 information and education. So look out for that information coming up. All right, thank you so much for everyone for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.